Lawmakers from Montgomery County are asking for more federal aid and also state aid for the area. The county, along with the rest of the Mohawk Valley, saw some very devastating floods just over a year ago. And while the state did provide funding to help with rebuilding, they had another incident, unfortunately, last month, another round of storms. And my next guest says it is time to make a long-term commitment to rebuilding. Assemblyman Angelo Santabarbara joins me in studio now to talk more about the problem. Welcome back to Capitol tonight.
Thanks, Liz.
It's unfortunate that you keep coming in here anytime there's flooding in your district, but it is a serious problem. So this latest event occurred on June 13th, but people were still trying to recover from the last event. Is that the problem?
Yes. Well, this was excessive rain that caused houses to be evacuated, families to be displaced once again, damage to infrastructure and private property, and it's sort of a common occurrence now that around this time of the year we hear about these events happening more and more. And unfortunately, Montgomery County has seen its share of severe weather events causing damage to not only property but also infrastructure. So we're asking, at this point we're asking that these areas now be included in the New York Rising program to build back this infrastructure to make sure that we're prepared for the next storm, because it seems like they just keep coming, and over time the numbers just build up.
So you wrote this letter to Governor Cuomo, yourself and Senator Kachik, representing the area, on June 26th, and you were asking for just $250,000, which is a lot to the average person, but for the state is really just a drop in the bucket. And did you hear back?
We have not heard back at this point, and $250,000, although compared to the last event, seems like a small amount, but again, we've seen a lot of these storms, so it's sort of a cumulative number. You keep adding on, another devastating event, and you add more to the price tag, and it builds up over time. And this is going to cause private citizens as well, so they haven't tallied that number yet. So there's going to be more. We're expecting more on top of this.
And this was not a federally declared disaster area, right? So what you had the last time around is when you get designation from the state or from the feds, that opens the door to additional funding, and that's not the case in this instance.
No, it's not the case. And last year, again, we had the state did step in because the individual assistance did not come through, and we did the Upstate Recovery Program to provide the $4 million to Montgomery County families.
From SEMO, so you need a designation in order to get federal funding. That didn't come in for a certain segment of people who were impacted. I mean, this does sort of beg a larger question, which is a difficult question, which is, should you actually, if in fact you're in a situation where this keeps happening, isn't there a moment where you have to say, well, wait a minute, maybe we have to think about should we build back? Where should we build back? To what degree should we build back? Because though people have a very personal connection to their homes and their businesses and their town, et cetera, maybe it's not wise at a point.
And I think you said it exactly. Some of these towns are historic, a lot of history through this whole region. Generations upon generations that have lived here. So I think that with the technology, the new engineering that we have, we can flood-proof buildings. We can build back better infrastructure that will stand these types of storms. Whereas years ago, maybe we didn't have the technology. But I think now we do, and I think that's what New York Rising is about: to get the information from the local level, figure out how we can build back these roadways, these bridges, these culverts, so they can withstand these storms. We didn't have to deal with as much before. Now we do. We have better data as well. So there's other information that we have where we can invest in sound infrastructure, flood-proof buildings, and make sure that we can withstand these storms.
It's got to be concerning to you, though. I mean, if this letter is dated June 26th and it's now July 3rd and you haven't heard back, what does that mean? I mean, I understand that the state did come through the last time around, but what's the holdup?
Well, we're waiting to hear back. Certainly, we're going to keep pushing. We're requesting any assistance from the state that can be offered here. We're working with local officials to develop a resiliency plan, and certainly any assistance that we can offer the local officials and the families would be beneficial to that.
And yet you haven't heard anything. I mean, what does that mean? I guess the thing is, the governor, this administration in general, has been celebrated for its response, particularly to Sandy, but also to Irene and Lee, and you have a lot of local officials touting them for paying attention and being on top of it, and yet in this case, that doesn't seem to be apparent.
Well, I think it means that we just need to keep pushing and need to make sure that money comes through. We need to keep doing our job, requesting the money, showing the impact that's going to have, showing that there's a need for these families. We've got to make sure that we do our job as legislators to make sure that we are addressing the needs of the families that live in our district in this area, and making sure that we're getting them assistance as soon as possible.
What's the situation then with private insurance? Is that not sufficient?
Well, you know, there's sometimes private insurance doesn't come through. Sometimes there's a delay. We need to provide the assistance that we can from the state, and then the insurance part will have to cover their part of it if they can.
There's also a question as to when the money would come through and where it would come from, right? I mean, in $250,000, again, not a huge sum for the state, but you're suggesting it come from New York Rising. That is specifically where you want the money to come from.
I'd like the money to come from, you know, I'd like the money to come from the budget. Last year we came through with aid for the individual families, individual assistance. I think this money we should find this money to make sure that we are. These are financially stressed communities. A lot of these communities, so they really can't withstand this type of damage. So I think we should offer whatever assistance we can from our state budget. I think that we should include these areas that were not included in the New York Rising program. I think we should put them in now, so that when we build back, they have a chance to submit their plans and figure out how to build back for the next storm.
Well, when you talk about the budget, I mean, opening back up the budget would require the legislature to return to Albany at some point. I mean, at this point, there is no plan for a special session. The governor would call it, or legislative leaders would have to want to come back if you broach that subject with the leadership in the Assembly.
Well, no, I haven't, but I think that if that's what it takes, that's what we need to do. Again, it looks like a small number, but I think if you look at the cumulative impact over time, I think it's a very big number when you add it onto the total.
And going forward, though, this is clearly, as you mentioned, going to happen again. The governor has been quite clear. He doesn't want to talk about why. I mean, climate change, science, etc. People get hung up on that, clearly. And there was the Resiliency Act, of course, that did pass. And the environmentalists are quite happy about it. That requires local governments to actually take into consideration, at the very least, flooding and climate change and the impacts of that on their development. Was that enough, do you think? Should it have been stronger? Should there be a permanent line in the budget for this sort of thing?
Well, I think it's something we should consider, because as we said when we started this conversation, we can almost expect year after year that, you know, these things are happening, and they're happening more and more frequently. You're seeing, you know, we just had a tornado in Duanesburg not too long ago that ripped through the area. So we're seeing more and more of these things. New York has been subject to almost every extreme weather event you can think of in recent times. So we can expect that these things are going to happen more, and the better prepared we are, maybe dedicating some funds to this, it makes sense.
But maybe the better thing to do would try to be addressing the problem. In other words, yes, you do have to address the building back, the preparation, but maybe it's really a question of pollution control and climate change, which nobody really wants to talk about.
Well, and on a larger scale, you may be right on a larger scale, but I think with the technology, like I said, with the information that we have, the data that we have, we can build things better now. And I think we should, and I think it's a sound investment in these communities, especially in the western part of my district. I think it makes sense to make the investment to make sure that we can withstand these storms to the greatest extent possible technology will allow.
Well, Assemblyman will keep tabs on this one. $250,000, as we mentioned, not a lot of money, but means a lot to people in your district.
It certainly does.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.